Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Suho. People call me John Suho. I'm a support specialist in the WRC, helping out good folks like you every day. Today we're going to be talking about advances in security. Here's our rundown and agenda. First, we're going to talk about a fancy new LDAP feature about multiple domains. This came out this past year. We won't talk about it in detail because there was a preview presentation from last year, but we do want to give it a great nod. We're going to talk about TLS 1.3 and some of the very fascinating advances that brings over previous versions of the protocol. We're then going to jump to something that doesn't even exist yet, planned for role elevation, and talk about some benefits that might bring. We want to solicit your opinions and feedback, so if you have thoughts on what we talk about there or anywhere here, we want to encourage you to get in touch with product management. Our last topic will be talking a bit about things to keep in mind when setting up your environments for your security scans. We don't want you to go through all the trouble of doing a security scan against a target that's not valid, because that doesn't help anyone. And then we'll provide you that contact information for product management or for me so that you can get in touch with us and tell us what you think. All right, so advances in security. Things we're going to talk about today, that list I just went over, these are either new or proposed things to help you either do more powerful things or better safeguard the systems and those you serve, which basically makes you a secret agent. So today we're going to be talking about fancy new gadgets, exploding pens and whatnot. But security is not just about the new technology. It's also about mindset. So we'll be talking about the problems that the technology addresses and urging you to think through your security environments, like we were saying before, because we don't just want to give you an exploding pen. That doesn't really help you. It could very literally explode in your face if you do your pen testing wrong. So that's how we'll go. You may have many, many questions. We'll discuss them at the end of the presentation. If it merits a lengthier discussion, we'll put you in contact with product management, because a lot of this we do want to hear from you about. We want to engage you in conversation and make the product even better. All right, so on to the first of our action-packed topics, multiple LDAP domains. All right, so LDAP, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. The most popular implementation is Microsoft Active Directory, but we also support the Open LDAP implementation. So what is it? Well, it's a single identification or authentication directory that you can use across many applications. Well, it's great if you have one directory, but what if you need more than one directory? Well, we have multiple domains. This came out in InterSystems Iris 2018.2. It's going to come to Cache Ensemble at some point, TBD. You can learn more about it here, but let's go over a quick illustration of how multiple domains works. So you're trying to identify people. Let's go back to our secret agent metaphor, our motif. So you're a secret agent, you have a contact, you have to identify them and see whether they're authorized to receive whatever you have to give them. So you scan them with your handy-dandy face scanner, or you put in their credentials in the real world. That goes through to your directory. We're going to say you're a classical secret agent from Britain, so it would go through the British directory, spit out the information about this particular contact, so you know whether or not to authorize them. Well, that's pretty great and works pretty well if your contact is in that one database that you have, which is pretty great if that person and their face are in that database, in that directory, in that domain. But if you could configure multiple domains from several organizations, which is a real world, something you would actually want to do in the real world, then you could identify, well, people from all sorts of different organizations. So what does this look like in our product? Well, before, where you could only make one LDAP configuration pointing to one LDAP domain, now you can create as many of these entries as you want and just have the user append the domain to their username and they can log in as such. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail here. Much more detail exists in this presentation from last year, given by a very talented and beautiful individual. So we're going to move on and discuss some of the new upcoming things. Again, this is already available in InterSystems Iris, and it will be coming to Cache Ensemble at some point soon. All right, now we'll be talking about TLS 1.3, which offers two very cool benefits: forward secrecy and increased speed of connection. Okay, so you're probably most anxious about seeing when it's going to come out. Well, TLS 1.3 is very new. The RFC for it was just finalized in 2018. The OpenSSL just put their release supporting it out at late 2018. A lot of development has already gone into InterSystems for this. At some point soon, it should be available in InterSystems Iris and at Cache Ensemble at some point thereafter. Okay, what is it? We're going to take a deep dive into some of the workings of TLS here. We're not going to have time to explain all of TLS, so I hope you will forgive some hand waving and some imperfect metaphors, but you will hopefully learn something. Okay, what is TLS? Well, it's a protocol for encrypting and authenticating client-server communication over a network. It stands for Transport Layer Security. It used to be called Secure Sockets Layer, or SSL, and I want to take the opportunity to tell all of you and your coworkers and loved ones that you should be using at least version TLS 1.1, ideally TLS 1.2 now, and you can use TLS 1.3 when it comes out. If you're using any version of SSL or TLS 1.0, you are considered insecure. So please don't do that. Uncheck any of those boxes in your configuration. I will be happy to help. But today we're talking about TLS 1.3, which offers a lot of advancements, so much so that it was almost called TLS 2.0. And again, the two major advantages it offers, there's forward secrecy, which we'll explain, and increased speed. So, what is forward secrecy? Well, we're going to have to get some background and take a dive into how TLS works. Okay, so why do we use TLS? Because we communicate over networks, over the internet. We should always assume that we're being monitored or recorded. It is the internet after all. And so we use TLS to encrypt these messages. Forward secrecy is a way to run TLS so that the server's private key is not involved in the communication, meaning that if someone ever gains access to that private key file, they're not going to be able to crack recorded communication later on. So moving forward, things will stay secret, even if there is a compromise. All right, in our secret agent motif, you have two agents communicating with each other in the clear that need to send encrypted messages. They're going to need to set up how they're going to communicate first, just like we do in TLS. We do that with something called the TLS Handshake. Before we start encrypting, our two secret agents, or our client and server, need to agree on a specific encryption code. This will consist of an encryption algorithm, the rules for encrypting, and the session key, the special value to input to use in there. You can't really hide the algorithm, so you'll have to hide the session key. Now, we up here at the human level could come up with some sillier examples than the deep mathematics used in actual encryption algorithms. So, silly example, we're going to speak in poems, but only count certain letters. Well, if that's our algorithm, then our key could be, well, we're going to speak in haikus, and every 10th letter is going to be the one we care about. Another silly human level example, if the algorithm is we're going to combine two different English-based codes, then the key, those specific values, we could say they're Morse code and Pig Latin. Together they make up the session key. We're actually going to use a even sillier one for our example today. Our algorithm is to speak a foreign language with a different foreign accent. So we'll be speaking Russian with a Scottish accent. So, how do you exchange the session key? First, we'll show you how to do that without forward secrecy. So, without forward secrecy, some TLS Ciphersuites have the client generate a session key, the value used for encryption, and send it over to the server. How do they send that in the clear safely? Well, the client will first encrypt it with the server's public key. This is a static file, a static value that is used, that the server freely distributes. And it can only be decrypted using the server's private key. In our secret agent motif, we're going to say that the public key might be some special invisible ink. The private key is some special decoder glasses that can read said invisible ink. So you encrypt it, can't be decrypted by anyone unless they have the private key, which we're going to say is only the server, because hopefully it's being kept in a secure fashion. So an illustration here, the client generates the session key, encodes it with the server's public key, sends it over to the server, who uses their private key to decrypt it. Now both sides have the session key and they can start encrypting. Okay, so that's how it works with no forward secrecy. What's the problem with this? Well, you're using that private key. What if someone steals that private key? If they steal the private key, they can decrypt every session key. If they decrypt every session key, then they can read every encrypted traffic session. That's bad. I'm going to get up on my soapbox for a second and remind everyone, keep your private keys safe. Please don't email them to us. I wish I didn't have to say that, but I will. All right, so with forward secrecy, how do we exchange session keys? Well, we don't use the private key. Simple as that. So what will happen is the client side will have some information. The server side will also have some information, and they'll use these, send them to each other, and from that use complex mathematics that's easy to go forward but difficult to crack to generate the session key. Again, there's some hand waving involved in this metaphor, but the point is they don't use the private key, therefore we have forward secrecy. How does this relate specifically to TLS 1.3? Well, let's talk about Ciphersuites first. A Ciphersuite is a specific combination of all the algorithms needed to set up a TLS session. So a Ciphersuite will be this algorithm plus this algorithm plus this algorithm, all equal everything you need to set up a TLS session. This includes the algorithm for encryption and the algorithm for key exchange, plus some others we won't discuss. Now, during the TLS handshake, the client sends a ranked list of Ciphersuites it supports, and the server chooses the first Ciphersuite on the client's list that it too supports. And TLS, you see some big changes in Ciphersuites. TLS has only 5 Ciphersuites instead of many dozens, like in previous versions of the protocol. All of the TLS 1.3 Ciphersuites use Diffie-Hellman ephemeral for their session key exchange. That algorithm does not involve the server's private key. Okay, so only 5 algorithms, all of them have forward secrecy. If you're using TLS 1.3, that's required. You can have forward secrecy prior to this. TLS 1.2 offers many Ciphersuites with forward secrecy, but you have to specifically configure them. With TLS 1.3, you don't have a choice. So you may want to ask yourselves whether this is right for you. In some sites, in some configurations, you actually want the ability to decrypt your traffic for some reason. So as we offer you TLS 1.3, see if forward secrecy is right for you. Okay. The other main benefit of TLS 1.3, increased speed achieved by fewer network round trips. So that TLS handshake requires 2 network round trips. And while they're not as dramatic as, say, aviation round trips, they're still pretty dramatic. If your client is in Russia, if your server is in Britain, like a secret agent calling home, you would have 1 round trip to and from Russia, then another round trip to and from Russia before you could secure this communication. So why do we have 2 round trips? In the first round trip, the client offers up the supported Ciphersuites it has, and from that ordered ranked list, the server chooses the first one that it also supports. Also in that first round trip, once the server has chosen the Ciphersuite, it sends its half of the parameters needed to encrypt. One round trip. Second round trip, the client replies back with all of the parameters, all of its half of the parameters needed to generate the session key and start encrypting, then tells the server it's ready to encrypt. The server says it's ready to encrypt. They start encrypting. Okay, that's TLS 1.2. TLS 1.3, it can go a lot faster. So just one round trip from Russia to Russia with love. Okay, how can we get away with half the round trips? Well, there's only 5 supported Ciphersuites, meaning there's a pretty good chance that the client is going to get the Ciphersuite that it wants. The client sends its list of Ciphersuites ranked in its order, and it also sends its half of the parameters needed to start the encryption, all in that first message. The server picks the Ciphersuite, has already received all the parameters it needs from the client, and then generates the session key with its half of the parameters. It sends those parameters off to the client, who can then generate the key, and after that, they can just start encrypting. If for whatever bizarre reason things are configured so that the client doesn't get its first choice, everything just goes back the way it was before. The client sends its ranked list and its parameters for encrypting. The server says, against all odds, I'm not configured to use that Ciphersuite. I picked one of the other ones, so here are my parameters for encrypting using that one. We just have another round trip. The client says, okay, using that Ciphersuite, here are my parameters. We are all ready to go. Okay, so we've seen these 2 benefits of forward secrecy and fewer round trips, so increased speed for setting up the connection. Again, this is all relatively new in the world at large, and it should come out in a version of InterSystems Iris soon, and in a version of Cache Ensemble at some point in the future. Okay. Moving on to the rest of our action-packed series of topics. We've talked about LDAP features, which are already out. We've talked about TLS 1.3 features, which are coming out soon. We're now going to talk about role elevation, which is so new that it definitely does not exist. So, this is all still a gleam in the eye of product management. I cannot stress that enough. It is still being planned. As I said, it is definitely not built yet, and product management would love your feedback about what we're proposing today. We'll be putting up some contact information at the end of the presentation. You can take that, and please let us know what you think. So, let's talk about default admin accounts, which is the problem that we think role elevation will address. So there are user accounts like these, admin, super user, maybe even underscore system, that are on your systems. Maybe you use them. Maybe everyone else at your site also uses them. Maybe some attackers could also use them. What's the problem with this? First problem is those are known usernames. Those are default accounts, so the public in general, including potential attackers, already know half of the credential set. They know the username, they just have to guess the password, which sometimes can be pretty easy. So, another part of the problem of default user accounts, less effective auditing. You might be logging into the account, and all of your coworkers might be logging into the account, meaning that if we are auditing the actions taken by the account, we can't really be sure what human being in the real world was taking that action as the logged in user. Simple enough to understand. Okay, who logged in as the 007 user at 10 a.m. on Tuesday? Was it Sean? Was it Roger? Was it Pierce? Was it Daniel? It was 10 a.m. on Tuesday in 1987, so it was Tim. Oh, yeah, I forgot Tim worked here. Okay, our proposed solution to all of this, well, turn off all of those admin accounts and instead have each user logged into their own individual account have them take on or elevate to privileged roles only when they are needed. What does that mean? The best way I have to explain it, it's like sudo. Okay, just like with sudo, you probably don't want everybody logged into your OS as root all the time. They should only invoke that when they need it. Likewise, when a user comes into InterSystems or your application, they should get certain roles at login time, but other roles, you'll only want them to elevate into when they need to perform particular tasks. All right, how would this work? So a user would log in as normal, get the regular roles they've been configured with. Then, using a special management portal link or from the terminal or in code, some special API call, they'll pass in their password, their same password that they use for their regular user, as well as the name of the role that they want to take on at that point. Now, this specific user will need to be configured to be allowed to use that role in advance. It's not a free-for-all where all of the users on the system can take on any of the roles on the system. No, there is some setup at the beginning saying who is allowed to do what. Every time a user attempts to elevate into a role, that will be audited, whether they get the role or not. Because we want to know who gets roles, but also who is trying to get roles. It will come with an inactivity timeout, after which they will lose that role. If a user is sitting at the portal and they activate this elevated role, but then they're suddenly called away from their desk, we don't want to just leave that there indefinitely for many hours for an attacker to come in and try something. So we'll have an inactivity timer where if you're not actively doing things with that role, it will expire and you will be exited from the elevated role. When you're done doing whatever action you're doing, you can also exit the role manually in very similar fashion to how you got it. You know, there'll be a management portal link or there'll be an API that will drop you from that role back into your regular level of privilege. So, let's take a look at a fun example. So if our user is Sean, and at login time he gets the roles %operator and smooth operator, you'll see here that he's configured to also be able to take on these roles: administrator and security admin as InterSystems supplied roles, and he's also configured to be able to elevate into the custom roles of secret agent and bagpipe club member. So let's see him get that first one. So if Sean wants to elevate into one of these roles at the portal or using an API, he will pass in his regular password and the role that he wants to take on. We'll get an audit entry for this in the audit log, whether he's successful or not, but presuming he is successful and that he's at the portal, he'll get in. This inactivity timer will start. So if he is idle for a certain amount of time, let's say 20 minutes, the role is automatically exited. But let's say he does it, he's active, he completes whatever action he needs to take. After he does that, he manually exits the role using the API or the portal link. This also shows up in the audit log. So you know when he came in, presumably you know when he came out. That's all there in the audit log. Once he's exited this role, he can then elevate into any other roles that he wants. But he has to first return to his base level of roles. Okay, so that's how it works. A little bit more about how we set it up. So first thing that needs to happen is a user needs to be configured to be able to elevate into the administrator role. Either this would be set up when the instance is installed or set up later on. But once one user is configured to be allowed to elevate into administrator, then you can turn off all of the admin accounts so that people can't use them anymore. And the user that can elevate to administrator can create other users, if so desired, can configure them to be able to elevate to administrator or to security admin. And an important point here is that the instance keeps track of how many users can elevate to administrator, because it never wants that number to go to 0. We never want you to not have someone who can get into the instance. So you can't remove administrator privilege from the last user who has it, and you can't delete that user. Corollary to this is password resets. The way things stand now, any user with sufficient privilege can go in and just change the password of another user. We don't want that to be able to happen anymore. In the future, we want, at most, an admin to be able to reset that password. Give it a temporary password, and when the user logs in, require that user to specify a new password. The principle there is we don't want the admin or anyone else knowing that other user's password. It's just not something that other users should need to know. If there's only, what if the admin is the only admin on the system and they forget their password? Things really aren't that different from today. You'll need to recover the system using emergency access mode, which requires root or administrator privilege, exactly the same as it is today. Let's talk about a special case of a no password instance, sort of separate from what we've been talking about so far. So let's say there's a case where you didn't specify a user with admin privileges at install time. A good example of this would be, say, if there's a Docker container where the install happened before that Docker image was made, so you certainly weren't there to input a username and password. There could be other cases, but that's one of them. Well, we don't want to give out a default account, and we don't want a default username, and we certainly don't want a default password. So instead, the first time you try to access the instance, you'll be prompted to register a user, and that user will then have administrator elevation privileges. Again, all of this is very much an undeveloped proposal. We can't discuss more of the specifics because they don't really exist yet. Your feedback is welcome and desired. The contact info for product management and for myself, if you'd like me to talk to them for you, is there. So yeah, we want to know if there's anything in particular you'd like to see in these features. Just saying. So we're going to take a little bit of a different turn now. So we've been talking about new features. This is not a new feature. We're going to talk about proper environments for security scans. So this isn't the future. Hopefully this is the present. But just a few thoughts and a few caveats for things not to do. Okay, this first comes with a big disclaimer. InterSystems is not your security officer. We cannot certify your security testing. We can't tell you what tests to run, can't tell you what tools to use. We can't tell you whether or not you should employ an external security firm, nor can we tell you what external security firm to employ if you do choose to hire one. That being said, we will tell you this: make sure your tests are valid. Test environment should be secure and representative of your real systems. In our secret agent motif, let's say that you are trying to find vulnerabilities in a super powerful laser weapon, one capable of blowing satellites out of orbit. If you're looking for vulnerabilities in this laser system, you probably shouldn't be testing it against this laser system, which, is capable of destroying things on a different scale. So, just a few thoughts, by no means comprehensive. You should be using lockdown environments and removing, any parts of the application that aren't necessary to be there to reduce your attack surface. You should have a dedicated testing environment and not use your production system. And you should have the environment loaded with your application and with realistic representative data. Okay? First and foremost, use a lockdown installation. For those of you unfamiliar, locked down is one of the security levels that you can choose when installing an instance. If it's not a lockdown instance, it's not a valid target. We've been sent many reports of security scans done against instances with unknown security enabled, with minimal security installs. It's like testing your home security with your door not just unlocked but wide open. Or at the very least, your door is shut but your windows are wide open with a big sign that says, "Rob me." So product management is thinking of removing the option for minimal security, and they want to rename normal and locked down security to development and production respectively. So yeah, don't test against things that were never designed to offer security. A corollary to that, reduce the attack surface. Remove anything you don't need exposed. In your real instances, you should remove samples and docbook namespaces or any other parts that don't need to be there. You know, these things could be useful in development, but you don't need more area, more parts of the application out there for attackers to be able to get into. Samples and docbook are not installed by default on InterSystems Iris systems, but if you're using Cache or Ensemble, you should take them out of environments that you want to be secure. So don't test in production. Some customers test in production, which means they either bring down their production because they've succeeded in doing that and very quickly stop testing, or are so afraid of bringing down their production that they don't do rigorous testing. You should set up a proper separate test environment where you can do the real tests without worrying about destroying your business. In that environment, you'll want your application with realistic data. You can't just install a fresh instance of InterSystems Iris without your application, without any data in there. It's going to have a very, very different feel and attack surface to it. That's just how it is. All right. We told you we can't tell you what to do in your testing, but we do want you to talk to us. Certainly if you find a vulnerability, we want you to talk to us. But we also want you to talk to us beforehand because you're going to need to set up these environments. You're going to need the right software that you've been using and the right license for it. You'll get in touch with your account team. They know your environments. They're familiar with what you should have. Us down here in the WRC, we don't keep tabs on your environment, but we can get you in touch with your account team and make sure that you're able to set these up properly. You'll probably get pushback on this, maybe from yourselves right now, maybe from your coworkers, maybe from your boss, because it's hard. Do you really expect me to go through all the trouble of reaching out to InterSystems to get the proper software package and security license and set up dedicated environments separate from but practically identical to my production and/or development systems that need to be loaded up with my application and with representative data? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. Which, in other words, is to say, do you expect me to do this? Well, only if you want valid results. You don't want invalid results. A small nod about what we're going to call false positives. Sometimes you do security scans and you find results that seem troubling, but which are actually not indicative of any problem at all. Product management is planning a document detailing some common occurrences of things that look scary, but in reality are completely fine and are not vulnerabilities at all. So we've come down this long list of topics. We've talked about multiple domains as part of new LDAP features. I encourage you to watch last year's presentation. It's available on our Learning Services website to find out even more about LDAP features that have come out in this past year. We've talked about TLS 1.3, the power of forward secrecy, how it keeps you safer, how it may not be right for your environment if you intentionally want to decrypt traffic. But we've also talked about how TLS 1.3 offers increased speed because most of the time fewer round trips are needed to set up the encryption for the connection. We've laid out planned role elevation. This idea that we can not use default admin accounts, but rather have users elevate to privileges they need at the times that they need them, all of which contains a lot of auditing and is more granular. We've discussed a little bit about proper environments for security scans, which can be summed up in, well, test against something that looks like what should be out there in real life. And so we're at the last point, tell us what you want. This is very short. We've told you a lot of things. We want to hear from you. Andreas Diekow, who is here with us today, is the Principal Product Manager for Product Security. Please get in touch with him. You can tell him what you think about all of this, tell him of any other features, ideas, things you'd like to see, any questions that you have for him. Please get in touch with him. If you forget his name and remember mine, you can get in touch with me and I will get in touch with him for you. Your sales and account team, your sales engineers, account managers, service executives, you're already familiar with them. They're here to serve you, and they can get in touch with Andreas or myself or anyone in InterSystems you need. So with that, do we have any questions? Please.
One of the things you talked about was not testing your production environment for security breaches. I find that very interesting because we want to know if our production environment do port scans on it, do virus scans on it. We want to do those on a regular basis. Is that what you're referring to? You'd want us to set up a test system to do those type of tests? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, Andreas can speak to this further, but if you're rigorously testing against your production environment the way an attacker would, if you're doing it the way an attacker would, you could bring down your environment.
So about every 2 weeks, I get about 100 errors in the air trap with illegal CSP requests. And it's caused due to port scanning, I believe. We're still trying to figure it out. But how do you figure out if your production systems have holes if you don't actually test them? You know, you can't model, you can't copy everything that somebody implanted malicious software, right, on their non-production system. So how would you even, I don't understand how to do that without actually doing it against your production systems.
It depends on what kind of tests you're doing, right? So what you're doing is, I think, is the right thing, right? You want to check for the environment, right? What happens on the operating system level, virus, right? You want to check for that, that's fine, right? You want to check on the incoming communication ports, what you just mentioned, right? That's fine, right? What you don't want to do is penetration testing against the instance itself, right? You don't want to try to break into the instance to see if there are weaknesses in the implementation, because you can't really do this. Either you create a problem on the server by doing something like this, or you're not getting valid results. So we have seen some of these kind of things, which is they're carefully navigating this with the penetration testing, and it doesn't give you the correct feedback. You might get something that doesn't look right. So in these kind of cases, you really need to set up a test environment for penetration testing.
Right. Denial service,
that's the only thing that we're saying for penetration testing. You don't want to do this against your life.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Anything else, what you said, of course, makes total sense.
Other questions?
This is just a quick one, hopefully, but does the TLS 1.3 implementation change the sys.LDAP class at all?
So in sys.LDAP, I believe, if you mean for an outgoing connection?
Yeah.
It's hard to say because it's not out yet.
In progress, okay.
But TLS 1.3 is actually configured. Parts of it are configured separately from previous protocols because there are a number of differences. But I believe it should just work the same. Again, this is all subject to change because it's not out yet.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Within OAuth 2, you have the option to use TLS 1.3. And if I'm using OAuth in combination with RESTful services or FHIR resources, I gain access with a particular resource, with a particular interaction. But then I want to, for a moment, do some unusual interaction,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that requires an elevation in my role in order for me to do that. How would I have to apply for another OAuth token that gives me that elevated role for that little period of time in order to do that interaction?
We have time, so if you have any burning desires to ask questions, we can address them.
Thank you very much.
All right then, thank you.